What is up guys, Julian here, the French winemaking guy who makes wine videos here on YouTube. Yes, wine videos. You all know by now that France is extremely reputable for the quality of its wines. I made an entire video dedicated to why French wines are, generally speaking, so good and about the factors that have made it so special in the world of wine and what have made it what it is today. You're obviously welcome to watch it after hearing which are the best French wine regions that we are going to be talking about here. I'll link to that video about what makes French wine so special at the end of this video, as well as in the video description. Also, if you like learning about what you're drinking, primarily wine here, that's what we talk about mainly, consider subscribing to my channel to follow along the journey of what I call Julian's Wine School, where we learn, where we share the passion and knowledge of wine. But for now, let's focus on the top 10 best French wine regions, those wine countries that have all wine lovers around the world dreaming about beautiful landscapes, stunning castles, historic sites, beautiful vineyard landscapes and succulent wines. This is part 1 of the 3-part series where we first look at the 10 best wine regions, then we'll look at the 10 best French wine grapes like Chardonnay, Cabernet and many others, before digging into the 10 best, most admired wineries in France. So follow along the journey of this 3-part series about the best French wines, France's most famous wine regions. So we're going to go through the 10 wine regions that are the most famous coming from France. At number 10, I put two together that are relatively close together. Savoie and Jura, both are very famous for producing white wine. So if we're talking about the Jura, well, you'll have 3 grape varieties that are very famous coming from the Jura, 2 reds, the Pulsar and the Trousseau, and the famous wines, white wines, crisp white wines, dry white wines made from the Savagnin grape. You've probably heard from the Jura the wines that are called Vin Jaune, or the yellow wines that are oxidative wines, quite similar or at least comparable to the wines coming out of cherry. If we're talking about Savoie, well, you'll have different grape varieties such as the Mondeuse grape varieties, delicious white wines made in Savoie in the French Alps, crisp white wines that are so succulent to go with the Alp cheeses in particular, you know, and the fondue. Fantastic wines coming out of Jura and Savoie, so we are on the northeastern part of the country. Coming up at number 9 is the famous Beaujolais. Beaujolais is coming up, Beaujolais Nouveau is coming up very soon this year on the 3rd Thursday of November. You've all heard about Beaujolais, but you'll also have the Cru Beaujolais, the different villages that are so famous in Beaujolais, the Beaujolais Crus, but you'll also have the Beaujolais Village, and those wines are primarily red, made from the grape that is increasingly popular and becoming more and more trendy. That is called Gamay. Note that Beaujolais does make some white wines as well as some rosés, but they are less famous. Most of the white wines in Beaujolais, because it is so close from the Burgundy area of France, are made from Chardonnay. Most wines in Beaujolais are made from the Gamay grape. Coming up as number 8 most famous wine region is in France. You know, very famous, not all that as famous as some of the top wine regions that we'll talk about a bit later on. This is the Languedoc-Roussillon. Well, the Languedoc-Roussillon used to be one of the biggest wine regions in the entire world. It still is the biggest wine region in France if we're talking volume, if you're talking, you know, volume of wine outcome. Where do we start with describing Languedoc-Roussillon wines? It's a sunny area down on the Mediterranean that makes opulent red wines as well as some white wines and quite a bit of rosés in such appellations. I mean, there are, I think, over 30 different appellations in Languedoc. You'll have the Fougères, you'll have the Corbière, but you'll also have Saint-Emilion. What else? The famous appellations that are Pic Saint-Loup. You will also have the Terrasse du Larzac. I actually made an entire video dedicated to Terrasse du Larzac. Many appellations. The grape varieties in Languedoc are around the same as in the Rhône, the Grenache, the Syrah, the Mourvèdre, And you will also find, this is the famous GSM blend, but you will also find a lot of Carignan grown in Languedoc. Mourvèdre, yep, with an accent here. So famous wine region of Languedoc as number 8. Many famous wines come from the Loire Valley of France. So Loire Valley, the Loire River is the longest river in the entire country of France. It's very long, so it starts right at the center of the country, where you will find a lot of wines made from Sauvignon Blanc, and we'll get to Chenin Blanc before, but Sauvignon Blanc, you've all heard about Sauvignon Blanc, where Sauvignon Blanc originates from the Loire Valley, particularly the upper part of the Loire Valley, and some of the most famous Sauvignon Blanc wines in the Loire Valley and in the world are made in Sancerre. If you go a little bit further down the Loire Valley, and I've just made a video, a trip all around the Loire Valley to learn more about them, you will find a lot of white wines made from the famous, the iconic grape from the Loire Valley, white grape, that is the Chenin Blanc, but the Loire Chenin Blanc that is particularly famous for being grown in the Touraine area, but also in an area that is called Savenière. Savenière, I believe there is two N's here, Savenière. Many sweet wines made out of Chenin Blanc, such as the wines made in the Clos de la Roche. You will have the sweet wines that are made in the Coteau du Layon and the Coteau de l'Aubance. Well, some fantastic wines made from Chenin Blanc. You must remember and try many wines from Chenin Blanc. If we're talking red wines, well, the iconic grape in the Loire Valley is going to be Cabernet Franc, that you've all heard about. Look out for the wines made in Chinon, the wines made in Bourgueil and Saint-Nicolas de Bourgueil as well. Particularly that's from the Anjou area near the city of Angers. Angers, delicious wines made from Cabernet Franc in the Loire Valley. A very famous French grape that is also increasingly popular. Coming up at number 6 as the most famous wine regions of France is obviously Alsace by the German border. It changed hands with the Germans, this Alsace wine region that is facing the Rhine River. The Rhine River, that is the border between France and Germany, that has been fought over a couple of world wars, and that has been fought over history. Well, the Alsace wine region is very famous for producing particularly white wines made out of the German grape variety that is called Riesling. There is 3 main types of terroirs in Alsace. You will have wines grown on granite, so very mineral white wines that are grown on granite. You will have some schist and how do you write schist? Yep, schist, as well as slate. That's a second type, and you'll have some more clayey soil in Alsace, giving different expressions to the wines of Riesling. So Alsace wines are particularly famous for making wines that are called Vendanges Tardives. Vendanges Tardives, which are the late harvest wines, very delicious, very concentrated, powerful wines. And you will also have wines that are called Sélection de Grains Nobles, and those are special selections of noble grapes. So grapes affected by a fungus that is called botrytis. Botrytis, making some very intense tropical fruit characters into the wines that are called the Sélection de Grains Nobles. So a lot of Riesling wines in Alsace, but many other grape varieties as well, such as Gewürztraminer in Alsace, very popular, very fragrant. Loads of floral characters into the Gewürztraminers, a lot of apricot, very fragrant ripe apricot. What else in Alsace are you going to be finding? You are going to be finding some Pinot Gris wines in a dry style, opulent dry style coming out of Alsace, if we're talking Pinot Gris, and you will have a lot of Sylvaner wines. Alsace does make quite a bit of the red wines, in particular out of the Pinot Noir grapes, and Alsace also makes some sparkling wines that are called Crémant d'Alsace. Crémant d'Alsace, delicious white wines made out of Pinot Blanc, in particular Pinot Blanc grape variety, together with a bit of Riesling. Sometimes they put a bit of Gewürztraminer. Delicious sparkling wines coming out of Alsace. Coming up at number 5, of course, we have to talk about Provence, that is so famous for producing the typical dry rosé style, dry rosé French style of rosé wine, pick wines, pale wines, dry wines, delicious with the typical food coming out of Provence. But look out for the red wines coming out of Provence as well. So we are on the coast, on the French Riviera, on the Mediterranean coast, on the sunny side of France, on the south of France, the beautiful region of Provence that is of course so famous. If we're going a little bit north of Provence, where we are going to end up in the Rhône Valley, that is so famous for producing deep red wines, spicy wines, opulent wines like those known from the most famous of all appellations in the Rhône Valley, the Châteauneuf du Pape, but you will have nearby villages such as Vacqueyras or the Gigondas. You will have Baume de Venise, many red wines coming out of the northern part of the Rhône Valley, such as the Côte Rôtie, the Hermitage. The grape varieties grown in the Rhône are the Grenache, as well as the Syrah, and as we talked about, the Mourvèdre, the typical GSM blend in particular, but you will also have fantastic white wines made from the grape that is called Viognier, in particular around a small village in the northern part of the Rhône Valley that is called Condrieu. Other white grapes that are grown in the Rhône are the Roussanne and the Marsanne. Tight, mineral, fragrant white wines coming out of the Rhône Valley. So many famous wines coming out of the Rhône Valley. Such a famous wine region. But let's move on further north to number 3, the podium of the most famous of all wine regions in France, the region of Burgundy. Obviously, you've all heard about Burgundy. It is so famous. I mean, as the top 3, it is hard to rank which wine region in France is the most famous, but I've put Burgundy at number 3 because you will see that the top 2 are made with such famous wine regions. So Burgundy obviously makes some of the best Chardonnay wines in the entire world, the likes of Montrachet and the Corton wines, Puligny-Montrachet, Chassagne-Montrachet, but you will also have fantastic Chardonnay wines coming out of Meursault, as well as Chablis. I mean, so many famous Chardonnay wines, but of course the red wines of Burgundy are just as famous, made from the Pinot Noir grapes. Where do we start with the famous red wines from Burgundy? Well, you'll have obviously Gevrey, Chambertin. What else? You'll have the Vosne Romanee wines, many famous villages all along the Côte de Nuit area, all along the Côte d'Or, the Gevrey Chambertin, the Vosne Romanee, the Morey Saint-Denis, I mean the Clos de Vougeot. So many red and white wines coming out of Burgundy, both from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. As number 2 comes, of course, the top wines made from Bordeaux, made from blends, generally speaking, blends from the most famous of all red grapes in the world, Cabernet Sauvignon, and perhaps the second most famous grape that is grown in Bordeaux, that is called Merlot. But you will also find, as we talked about in the Loire, some Cabernet Franc wines made in Bordeaux, as well as the Petit, Verdot, and the Malbec. Those 5 grape varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc and Malbec, forming what is called the Bordeaux Blend. But Bordeaux also, of course, makes, it's lesser known, but it makes famous white wines in Bordeaux that are made from 2 grape varieties that are often blended together, the Sauvignon Blanc and the Semillon. Obviously, Bordeaux is also famous for producing sweet wines, in particular in the area that is called Sauternes. The wines such as the Chateau d'Yquem one of the most famous of all Bordeaux producers, one of the most famous wineries in the whole world. Some of the most famous wines in Bordeaux were classified in 1855, and the famous 1855 classification of the wines of Bordeaux, but you will also find many wines coming out of the right bank of the Bordeaux region, such as the wines from Saint-Emilion and the wines of Pomerol. I mean, I could spend hours and hours and many minutes talking about all the wines from Bordeaux, the famous wines that are grown in Bordeaux. But let's move on to arguably, but the most famous of all wines coming out of France, of course, the sparkling wines made in Champagne. So Champagne have many famous names. So if you're wondering what are the grape varieties that are used in Champagne, well, there are three: Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, just like in Burgundy, but they have a third grape varieties that is used for making the top sparkling wines of Champagne, that is called Pinot Meunier. So of course, if we are to look at some of the most famous wines coming out of Champagne, of course you will have Dom Pérignon, arguably the most famous of all prestige cuvées coming out of Champagne. Of course you will have Moet Chandon. Do say Moet Chandon. I made a video about why you should definitely say Moet and pronounce the T here and not Moet Chandon. But of course you will have the likes of Veuve Clicquot. Well, what else? I mean, so many very famous names. Nicolas Feuillate. If you want to learn more about many wine producers, I made a lot of videos on this channel about the most famous producers of Champagne wines. Obviously the Krug champagnes, so many different wines, many different terroirs. I made an entire video about the art of blending in Champagne and why Champagne is so special. So if you do want to learn more about what makes Champagne wines, the sparkling wines, the French Champagne wines, what makes them so special, so unique in the world of wine and unbeatable, unmatched in the world of wine, I made a video about French champagnes on this channel that's called The Art of Blending. I will link at the end of this very video if you want to learn more. Overall, if you want to learn more about wine, well, you've fallen on the right channel. There are many wine videos on my channel talking about all the most famous French wines, how to pronounce the different wine regions, everything that you need to know about wine. Stay tuned to the channel for part 2 of this series, where we are going to be talking about the top 10 grape varieties that are grown in France. We've seen a few here: the Chardonnays, the Pinot Noir, the Cabernet Sauvignons, the Gamays, but we will see and we will talk more deeply about other grapes, maybe a less expected wine grape varieties. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a quick thumb up before you go to support my work, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Au revoir, bye bye, cheers, santé, hasta luego.